No one at St. Bartholomew's General could say with any certainty. When Maren Kellerman first walked through the staff entrance, that was the strange thing about her arrival. Not dramatic, not announced, just a quiet Tuesday in early November, when she appeared at the nurse's station in pressed navy scrubs, her ID badge clipped at a perfectly even angle, already reading through patient files like she'd memorized the hospital's entire filing system the night before. Nobody remembered training her on the computer system. Nobody remembered her asking where the supply closet was. She simply knew the way some people know things without ever being told, and that unsettled people more than they wanted to admit. The emergency department at St. Bartholomew's ran on a particular kind of exhaustion, the kind that turns brilliant, overworked people into something a little meaner than they intend to be. It wasn't malice, exactly. It was 13-hour shifts and never enough hands, and a hierarchy that everyone pretended not to care about, while caring about it desperately. Into that environment, Maren Kellerman did not fit because she refused to participate in any of it. She didn't join the lunchroom complaining sessions. She didn't roll her eyes at difficult patients in the hallway, where someone might overhear and repeat it. She didn't trade favors or anger for the better assignments. She showed up. She worked with a kind of stillness that read as either supreme confidence or mild arrogance depending on who you asked, and she went home. Bethany Okafor noticed it first. Because Bethany noticed everything. She'd been charge nurse on the day shift for 6 years, and she had a finely tuned radar for anyone who didn't perform the right amount of visible effort. Maren never looked stressed, never looked rattled, not even during the chaos of a multi-vehicle pileup that brought in 11 patients in under 20 minutes. She moved through the wreckage of that afternoon with the calm of someone reading a recipe, and when Bethany mentioned this to a colleague later, it didn't come out as admiration. It came out as suspicion. "She's off." Bethany said more than once in the break room, over coffee that had gone cold an hour earlier. Something about her doesn't add up. Nobody could say exactly what didn't add up. That was the trouble with the accusation. It had no edges, no specifics, just a vague unease that spread the way these things do in tight, tired workplaces. Picking up weight from people who'd never even spoken to her directly. Dr. Graham Wentworth, the senior trauma attending, was the kind of doctor whose confidence had calcified into something to certainty. 19 years in emergency medicine had taught him a great deal, and convinced him there was very little left to learn, especially not from a newly hired nurse half his tenure. He watched her place a central line one Thursday evening, with a precision that should have impressed him. Clean entry, no hesitation, done in under 90 seconds, and instead he made a comment to the resident beside him about beginner's luck. He didn't check her file. He didn't ask where she'd trained. He simply filed her away as competent for now and moved on to the next bed. Maren said nothing. She never said anything. Not really, not about herself. She absorbed the slights the way she absorbed everything, without visible reaction, filing it somewhere unreachable. Her attention already drifting to the next patient, the next chart, the next small emergency waiting its turn. Her locker, if anyone had ever looked inside it, which they hadn't, held almost nothing personal. A spare set of scrubs folded with military precision, a laminated trauma card, edges soft from years of handling, and tucked behind a water bottle, a small brass coin, worn smooth on one side, that she never explained because no one ever asked. The shift that changed things happened on a Wednesday, in late January, the kind of gray Ontario afternoon that made the hospital lights feel harsher than usual. A 6-year-old boy, in recovering from a routine appendectomy, coded without warning on the post-op floor. The alarm went up and the corridor dissolved into the particular controlled panic that only exists in hospitals. People moving fast but trying not to look like they're moving fast. Voices low and urgent. Maren was already there. She'd been 2 doors down, charting, and something in the rhythm of the monitors must have told her before the alarm did, because by the time the code team arrived, and they arrived quickly, this was a good hospital, a well-run department. She had already opened the airway, started compressions with a steadiness that came from somewhere other than a textbook, and identified correctly a collapsed lung that the post-op team had missed in their initial assessment. She stepped back the moment SING staff took over. Didn't linger to be thanked. Didn't mention it again. Walked back to her station and resumed the chart she'd been working on, as though nothing unusual had happened at all. Dr. Wentworth, reviewing the incident afterward, sat with the report for a long while, trying to make sense of how a nurse with less than a year at St. Bartholomew's had caught something 3 more experienced clinicians had missed in the chaos. He didn't ask her about it. He told a colleague instead that she'd gotten lucky again. And the colleague, the way these things travel, repeated it to someone else. And by Friday the story had shrunk down to something almost unremarkable. A fluke, a coincidence. Nothing worth examining too closely. Marin heard the revised version. The way she heard most things that were said about her. In rooms she wasn't technically supposed to be in. She didn't correct it. She ate her lunch alone in the corner of the cafeteria nearest the window, reading a worn paperback she kept in her bag, and across the room Bethany Okafor and 2 of the younger nurses glanced over and laughed quietly at something. Marin turned a page. She didn't look up. That night, 4 time zones away, in a building in Ottawa that didn't appear on any public directory, a secure line rang. The call lasted under 5 minutes. The person on the other end used a name that wasn't the one on Marin's hospital badge. A call sign, a designation she hadn't heard spoken aloud in over 2 years, and asked whether she was still operational. She said she was. She always was. The helicopter arrived on a Saturday morning, low and fast, banking over the hospital's rooftop pad, with an urgency that had nothing civilian about it. The sound reached the building before the aircraft did. That deep rhythmic thudding that rattled the windows along the corridor, connecting emergency to the surgical wing. Staff stepped out of patient rooms. A resident froze mid-sentence. Someone near the nurse's station said quietly, "That's military." And within seconds half the floor had drifted toward the windows. Because a military medevac landing at a civilian hospital in downtown Hamilton meant something had gone very wrong. Somewhere most of them would never hear about. The rotors hadn't fully stopped when the side door slid open, and 2 figures in tactical gear stepped out, moving a stretcher at a controlled run across the pad. Behind them, 3 more formed a loose perimeter, and nobody on staff felt inclined to ask questions. Equipment those 3 were carrying. Marin was already in the corridor before anyone had paged her. Nobody had called her name specifically. She had simply heard the aircraft's approach, recognized something in its engine pitch and descent angle that no one else in the building would have known to listen for. And she'd started moving before the alarm even sounded. She reached the bay doors just as the team came through them, her badge swinging gently against her chest, and the lead operator, a broad-shouldered man, whose face carried the particular exhaustion of someone who hadn't slept in 2 days, stopped mid-stride when he saw her. Something passed over his expression that the watching staff couldn't quite name. Not relief, not exactly recognition. The kind shared only by people who'd survived the same things in the same places and never spoke of it anywhere else. "Kellerman," he said. It wasn't a question. "What do we have?" she said. Already moving toward the stretcher. Already scanning the field dressings. The IV lines, the monitor leeches applied with the rough efficiency of people working under fire. What they had was a combat medic, the man who in the field was usually the one doing what Marin was doing now for everyone else. He'd taken shrapnel during a training exercise that had gone wrong, in a way nobody wanted detailed in an after-action report distributed beyond a very small circle. His abdomen was compromised, his blood pressure dropping steadily despite the efforts of the team that had kept him alive long enough to reach Hamilton. They'd had 35 minutes of flight time and exactly 1 name on the list of acceptable destinations. Dr. Wentworth arrived at the end of the hallway, drawn by the commotion, walking with the automatic authority of a man who assumed every emergency in his department belonged to him. He made it 3 steps from the doors before the lead operator, without turning, without raising his voice, said simply, "Sir, stand down. We requested a specific provider." Wentworth stopped. He looked toward Marin, who was already gloved, already directing the trauma team with a quiet total command that none of them had ever heard from her before. Not loud, not forceful. Just absolute. The voice of someone who had spent a long time being the last thing standing between a person and the end of their life. The surgery ran just under 3 hours. Marin directed, assisted, and at 2 critical points, made calls that left the attending surgeon visibly unsettled by how quickly and how correctly she'd read the situation. When it was finally over, when the medic was stable and breathing on his own, and the team waiting outside had finally allowed themselves to exhale, the lead operator found her at the scrub sink. He thanked her. She nodded once, the way she did everything economically. He started to say something else. Something about people from her old unit who still asked after her. Who hadn't forgotten. And she stopped him gently, a small shake of her head. "I'm just the quiet one on the 3rd floor," she said. And something close to a smile crossed her face before it was gone again. Down the hallway, Bethany Okafor stood very still. A chart in her hands that she hadn't actually looked at in nearly 10 minutes. Watching Marin walk back toward the nurse's station. As though nothing at all had happened. As though a military aircraft hadn't just crossed half the province, looking for one specific woman in a hospital full of people who'd spent a year underestimating her. As though the coin in her locker, the one nobody had ever asked about, didn't carry an insignia that explained everything they'd never bothered to notice. No one at St. Bartholomew's mocked the quiet nurse again after that. Some lessons announced themselves, quietly over months, in ways easy to miss. This one came in on a helicopter, and nobody in that hospital ever forgot it.